everybody, and welcome to Expressing a Youth Perspective on Climate Damage Using Animation. This is an event that's part of the ESRC Festival of Social Science that's ongoing for these weeks. We're coming to you from the beautiful Sonic Lab at SARC, the Sonic Arts Research Centre at Queen's University. And today we're going to present some work and discussions by students of the MA Media and Broadcast Production here at Queen's over the last few years. So we've got a collection of 3 years, 3 cohorts of the MA coming together to present work and to exchange ideas about this very, very pressing question that we have about the environment, about climate change, that is underlined obviously by what's happening currently in Glasgow, COP26. The focus of today's event really is to hear what this looks like and what this should be like from a youth perspective. So I'm not going to talk for very long because I'm unfortunately not very young anymore. So I want this to be a platform for younger people, our students, to express through their own work and through their discussion what it looks like from their perspective and what it should be like in the future. This event is framed or is sold as an event about animation, and we certainly will be talking about animation, but we're also expanding beyond animation to look at other aspects of the work that we do here at Queen's. So initially we will look at animations that students have produced here in connection with and funded by the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. But we're also going to have another segment about looking at a transatlantic conversation between students here and young people here and students and young people in the United States. The first part of that will be through a collaboration with Columbia University, and the second part will be looking at a magazine called Unpublished, which has contributors both sides of the pond. Again, looking at what are the cross-cutting and similar themes, but what are the localized differences as well. And then finally, we're going to look at how the web can be a very useful tool now and in the future for communicating our ideas. And we're going to look at a website that's been produced by our students called Green Future Media that is about to kick off into a second iteration. So I'm just going to say a few thank yous and then I'm going to disappear. Thanks to all of the students from this year's cohort that put so much work into this, especially the core team. We made it alive and we made it in one piece, thank God, although last night at 3 a.m. it wasn't clear if that was going to happen. I'd like to thank Craig Jackson, Ashley McGowan and Johnny McGuinness, our technical support team here, who have put in a huge amount of work to help us pull this together as a live event here in the Sonic Lab, but also as a live stream. And we have people watching in Belfast, Dublin, in mainland Great Britain, and across the pond in the United States. In the United States, I'd like to pay a special thank you to Professor Marguerite Holloway and her colleague Brian Palmer at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. Through their module covering climate, visual storytelling, we managed to get in touch with 2 of the students that we're going to hear from later that are covering climate in New York. I'd like to say a special thanks to the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, NIHRC, their Chief Commissioner, Alison Kirkpatrick, and Jason McKeown and Lisa Wilson, who have joined us today. We are launching the animations today that were produced by our students and funded and helped by NIHRC, and I really want to thank them for that opportunity. I'd like to thank the ESRC, that is the Economic and Social Research Council, who's funded this event, and Joan Grieve, who works at Queen's, on the Queen's level with that organisation. Very special thanks, Joan, for your support in the recent weeks. I'd like to thank Lorraine Brown, who has helped very much on the finance side in the finance office of the School of Arts, English and Languages. And finally, Dr. Nuala Flood, I'd like to thank her. She's at Architecture in Queen's, and through her and her Public Collab annual project that we collaborate on, we managed to have some really interesting contributions that are coming up today. So without further ado, I'd like to hand off to the first of 2 animations. This animation is called Dakota. It's about a young Northern Irish woman called Dakota, who you're going to meet right after this animation. So enjoy this.
I've always been out looking for butterflies. Butterflies really encapsulate the fragility of our environment. It makes you realise just how much we have in Northern Ireland in terms of biodiversity. and also how much we have to lose. Politicians really need to start listening. Our voices are never being listened to. We always go back to the same issue. It is a human right to have a healthy environment. Young people, we are the future. We do have a voice that we're not afraid to use. Young people are organising and taking control of their futures and really doing something about these issues that they're so passionate about. Seeing those impacts fan out in the future, sort of like a butterfly effect. Every contribution and every person who's appreciating the environment a little bit more is sort of adding to the hope that we can create a better future.
Hi, I'm Dakota Reid and I'm the voice that you just heard in that animation. I'm a student here at Queen's doing my Masters in Ecology and I'm also an environmental campaigner. With me here today I have Shauna Graham and Melissa Ray, who are part of that animation that you just watched. And I also have Isabel Schultz with me today, who is part of the team behind the animation Nia, which you're going to see in a few moments. I'd like to thank the NI Human Rights Commission who funded this project, and we're delighted and honoured to have with us here today Jason McKeown and Lisa Wilson from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. Thank you for joining us here today. So I'm going to get started on the questions here, and I'd like to ask both the creators behind both animations, what led you to choose looking at a youth perspective on climate for this project?
Well, we actually took the position that the young people really need to be listened to by political leaders of the time, especially now. We wanted to actually bring it across as, a youth perspective. We need that climate change talks now. We need to do something now, and every little action that we take as young people can have an impact on the environment at large. So.
Yeah. Plus, with young people are so involved in social media, that's what we'll see, and that's where they will platform this and show this. And we knew that it's so much easier to spread awareness and spread these messages through that platform as well. So it's so important to really highlight what young people are actually doing, because we don't normally see it on the news or anything. That is where you're going to see it, so it's just broadcasting that even more.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what's been said. I've recently learned a term which I very much agree with, is the fact that we are Gen Zero. So what we do is basically the starting point of a better future.
Yes, hopefully, if our world leaders are listening. And again, to both teams behind both animations, how do you feel that your animations tie into COP26, which, as we know, is going on right now in Glasgow?
Well, I think that you should really focus on, in our animation particularly, the butterfly effect. There's a little simple change, a little simple decision that you can make that could actually impact further on the climate and our impact on the environment. And we need to be able to preserve, especially in Northern Ireland, the biodiversity and everything that we have around us, we're taken for granted. So a small change to our lifestyle could actually impact so greatly on what we've already seen in our landscapes, at large.
Yeah, plus, in relation to what's going on at the minute, this is what youth and everyone has been talking about for so long, and it's now getting looked at, and it's we've been pushing for this for ages, and yes, it's starting to be talked about, but is it actually being listened to? And that's the whole message behind it, is that you can still hear what's happening, but are you actually listening and taking it on? So it's like a hope that that is what's going to happen. And even if it maybe doesn't go the way we all want it to, it won't stop the voices of youth activism and trying to get that message out there.
Yeah, we can actually impact by, influencing the world leaders now as it is. These are very, difficult issues that we have to deal with, but we want them to really listen to what we will have to go through in the years to come. So-
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think for us, for NIA, what mattered for us is kind of the fact that people always feel like they have to be the perfect environmental activist or the perfect zero waster, and our statement is basically every little bit counts. If you go dairy free or you pick up rubbish in the street, that matters, and that all adds up to the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And do you all think that the world leaders right now in Glasgow are listening to us? Do you think they're picking up on these sorts of messages?
Well, no one can say for certain, can we? But it all depends on their actions, and we can see our own actions and what we're doing and what we're trying to bring. And I feel like there's a lot more of us than there is maybe of them, and sometimes numbers is what brings more change rather than one person finally deciding and being like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, we're going to pass this bill or we're going to do this. But unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, brilliant. And I want to ask specifically Melissa and Shauna about why do you think it is important to link the nature loss and the climate crisis? Because we're hearing a lot about climate at the moment, but obviously part of the animation that we just watched, we were talking about nature loss as well. Why is that important to link the two? And do you think that nature loss gets forgotten about a bit in this discussion?
Climate change is obviously impacting our environment as it is, even with the butterfly species that we focused on. I mean, the very, very smallest creatures are disappearing before our very eyes. And, that will lead on to even greater impacts for down the food chain and eventually to us. So we need to really, emphasise that, and I think we have managed that through the animation, is to engage younger audiences too. That idea that we actually have these bright, vibrant backgrounds and we're showing exactly what we have in Ireland. And it's not just in Ireland, it's in every single country. We need to focus on where we're from, I suppose. But to see that, they're disappearing before our very eyes, and it is a very, very concerning issue. We need to take action now. Mm-hmm. That is what we're saying. But we also are engaging younger audiences through our animation. 16 to 24-year-olds, they will be feeling the impact of this. We need action now.
Yeah. Plus, all we hear about sometimes is just climate change. That's all it's ever really been about in any kind of conversation. Like before I even met you, Dakota, and you're telling me about, the butterflies are disappearing and even the peatlands. Like I had not a clue that any of that was going on until you were talking about it. And I probably would have never, unless I actively went and researched about it and looked it up myself. It's not been talked about enough, and it's so simple for the everyday person to kind of do wee things to do, like letting wildflowers grow in your garden to let more creatures in, or just things like that. It's just in your own backyard that you can do to make that a bit better, and that's so much more, I think, impactful for the everyday person and for us as young people, because sometimes it feels like we can't do anything. We can't do what the big politicians can do and just completely pass a bill or anything like that, but we can do wee things.
Yeah, absolutely right. And we can all make such a difference in our local green spaces, even if we don't have our own gardens. There is such a potential to make a difference. But Melissa, you were saying about, or sorry, Shona, you were saying about sort of looking at nature loss locally. Do you think whenever we're talking about nature loss, we're sort of thinking more about, the Amazon rainforest getting cut down, and we're maybe forgetting about how much we've lost locally?
Yeah, I think, young people don't actually focus on what they have right now, which is, the greenery in this island is beautiful. You come to certain areas at Kerry or whatever, they're just absolutely fantastic to look at and to appreciate and to enjoy for future generations. That was the whole point of making this animation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going to, future generations will have, a much less sustainable future if we don't change. So absolutely. And to both teams again about people say that the climate crisis is a communications crisis, and how do you all think that projects like this sort of help raise awareness of these issues in a way that maybe traditional media isn't?
For me, I think this is obviously nice to look at. It's just like it's an enjoyable animation, and people of all ages can watch it. Whereas when you, for example, look at the news and see the results of COP, one, it's kind of depressive, and two, you might not even understand it. Like there's a lot of words and a lot of writing, and you just get overwhelmed with it all. So I love projects like this where it focuses on a few aspects and you can learn something new without having to read several articles where you might not even understand half of the words.
Yeah, definitely. Like anyone can watch that and understand what it means. You don't have to know the latest statistic about it or know everything that's happening, but you completely understand through the animation aspect.
And I love the way that a specific story, like yourself, for instance, in our animation, your specific story is being told to like across transatlantic, whatever, you know, the different areas across the world. You're able to actually bring that story to people, condense it down and say, right, this is a wee person who's actually working on improving the environment in every single aspect of her life, really, is actually, you know, activism towards this. And you're saying, right, you can also get involved, no matter what part of the world you're in. And that's what we've really done. We've condensed your story down for millions, really, to enjoy.
Well, thank you so much for sharing my story. It has been really beautiful to see the final animation and get to see myself in animated form, which is really exciting, actually. I think I just want to go back to Isabel about, you know, obviously Nia is very young, and a lot younger than whenever I started environmental activism. Why do you think it is important to champion the voices of teenagers in the climate crisis?
I think it is so important because a lot of teenagers now are very passionate about their eco-activism, but they might not necessarily just know where to start, or they might feel, oh, what I'm doing is not enough. So by amplifying their voices and giving them basically a platform to state their opinions, they get empowered to do more. And then I also think teenagers now are the policymakers, politicians, and whatever else of the future. So we need to empower them now to allow them to be passionate in what they're doing and in their eco-activism in 20, 30 or even more years.
Mm-hmm. And Nia is very inspiring. I think she would make a brilliant decision maker, and I look forward to seeing where she goes with her activism. I think we have time for one more question, and this is to all three of you again. Do you think that the general public understand climate change as a human rights issue? And that was obviously a large part of this project that NIHRC supported. But do you think that sort of the message is getting through, that this is about human rights?
Partially.
Yeah, yeah.
I think a lot of people see it as a major issue, obviously, but I think we have to slightly change our wording. It's no longer just climate change, it's a crisis and an emergency. And people, for example, living here think, well, nothing has happened here really to me. Like, oh, it gets, 2 degrees warmer. Sure, it's pretty cold here, so how does that matter to me? But there's already climate migrants, there's already people losing their homes. Temperatures, for example, in India were at 49 degrees last summer. Like, people are dying of heat strokes simply just existing in a country they've lived in forever. So there's already so many people, other places being affected, that I think it just has to kind of break through to people that haven't experienced it yet.
Like human rights is giving everyone the opportunity to live and to survive, but how can we do that if we won't have a sustainable planet to actually live and survive on? Mm-hmm. So they are linked hand in hand, but it's so easy to forget about because, you know, we exist every day, we go about every day, it's part of our everyday. You don't think about breathing every day, but you do it. It's always there, and it's the same with our environment. and that's what we need to pay a more closer attention to.
And I think it's being underplayed, really, because when you ever talk to people about climate change here, it's all about, oh, the weather changes about 6 times per day and everything. It's really, really underplayed. But it's actually, it's impacting people, it's impacting their actual lives around the world. You can see it, even in Alaska, for instance, people being forced out of their homes because of the rising sea levels. It needs to be more emphasised, I think, for people in our country,
Yes, well, I absolutely agree. And I think we're now going to switch to the animation Nia, which we have just spoken about, and it's a really beautiful animation, so enjoy watching that.
I know from the walk from the bus stop to school every morning, see sausage roll packets all over the ground, and it would literally just be me walking down the road picking up wrappers and throwing them in the bin, because you kind of feel frustrated as well, because if you're doing something and someone else isn't, you kind of feel like that's cancelling out what you're doing. People who are younger feel like they don't have a voice because they had to go through the struggle of trying to get adults to listen to them. It's like these people are the ones that are the adults, they're the ones that are meant to look after you, but they'll still put you in the situation of, oh, you're 16, 17 years old, decide your university, decide your life choices, that's your future, but I'm working towards a future that might not be there. The whole point you go to school is to be educated and stuff. I don't even think I could say half my human rights because it's not really one of those list of things that you learn. But now, because something's wrong is being done against me, I feel like I need to educate myself on what I need to know, what's right and wrong, and what I am entitled to as a human.
So that animation was supported by Entry Yes in Belfast, and I think it speaks really well into youth voice and speaking truth to power. My name is Chelsea Abbott. I am an MA Media and Broadcast Production student, and I'm introducing our second segment, which is on transatlantic voices. So students here took this as an opportunity to exchange ideas about environment and climate change with students over in the US as well as journalists. So in our first of 2 conversations, Queen's students spoke about common challenges and specific local issues with 2 journalists from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, which is based in New York. They started by talking about how they cover their respective locations.
Northern Ireland, in comparison to the rest of the UK, is lagging behind on climate legislation and climate action. So the whole idea of the podcast is sort of starting those conversations and encouraging people to talk about climate change and the different ways that they can get involved. So we'll talk about things like fast fashion. I'm trying to get a segment going on farming, because farming's a big issue in Northern Ireland. So yeah, we just kind of try and touch on as much as we can to just sort of keep that conversation going, to kind of make sure that, you know, people know what's going on, people know how they can get involved, and that we're pushing change forward, because that's really a big thing for Northern Ireland, to kind of get that policy action going. So yeah, that's sort of what we do.
Yeah, a lot of it feels like the pressure has been put on individuals to combat climate change, when in reality it's like, as much as you can help or change your personal habits, that's just a drop in the bucket of what needs to happen to mitigate some of these causes. That's why with my story especially, I chose to focus on rainwater harvesting in New York City. There's ample rooftop space, like 40,000 acres worth of rooftop space. It's just like not being used for much. Some people go out and for the most part, it's just nothing up there. And I feel like that's like important to highlight. Like, you could have these systemic changes with private partnerships, or even with government help, to be able to utilize these resources. I mean, this year in New York, there was like something like 28 inches of rainfall between August and July. This is like all of that could have been saved, all of that could have been introduced, but instead what we got was some severe flooding events where subways were full of water. I'm sure some of you may have seen those images where it's like people waiting, and it's just like all of that is just wasted, and adding to the other effect of just coastal flooding, because all that water has to go somewhere, then it winds up on the coast and speeding up the causes of erosion. I don't know. I think it's important to look at, like, this isn't just something that individuals can solve. Well, it does take everyone to help. It's really just systemic things that we need to change about the society.
Yeah. And a lot of it's about adaptability as well, though, isn't it? Because I thought your article, Brandon, was really interesting, because we're already at a point where things are happening, and it's too late to stop them happening, because we've already reached that point of almost no return. Certain things are going to happen, and all we can do now is stop it getting worse. And that actually some of the solutions are about adaptability, and are actually thinking, what, we are going to have a lot of rainfall. How do we stop flooding, and how do we actually utilize that to our advantage?
I feel like New York is just in a place where climate change will affect it. Climate change is not an invisible enemy in New York. It can't be, because it's a freaking island, and surrounded by water, constantly getting hit by hurricanes. And also we have to consider the fact that it's a really old city. I personally lived in a apartment compact, or a apartment building that was from like the early 1900s. There's so much old infrastructure that we might not be able to save if we don't get our shit together.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, Belfast, I think, kind of is almost in part similar. The like parts of it will disappear, like ours is like a lot of our docklands and kind of stuff was reclaimed land, and so it was like land that was the sea. So like the shop I work in at the minute, should sea levels rise, that shop's going under like in the next like couple of decades, like.
Yeah, that boggles my mind.
Yeah.
It's really scary when you think about it that way, and when you sort of try and place it into perspective and actually give some like real life examples of what that can look like. Because I'm originally from Jersey, which is a tiny island in between sort of the south of England and France, and it's a tiny island, and if sea levels rise the way it is, like, it's the most populated areas that are going to disappear first. And I imagine New York's probably a bit like that if sea levels rise, it's actually where people are living that are going to be impacted the most, which I think is just a terrifying thought.
Yeah, they say in New York, every neighborhood has access to the water. So it's like every single neighborhood will be affected by sea level rise. The thing I'm curious about to hear from each of you is what got you interested in covering this topic. Just curious, anyone can start.
I suppose I've kind of always been interested in environment and everything else, like ever since I can remember, kind of when I go back through it. But I suppose I kind of go into journalism mode naturally, I think. Yeah, it's just, I think it's just for me, it's been like a good way to learn more about it and to kind of get awareness out there and to feel like I was doing something myself, especially during like lockdown and everything else.
And also going back to why climate change, it is the most important problem of our generation. It's just hard to ignore. And there's going to be real world impact where there's going to be so much migration, water, lack of just resources for people. And that makes it so much more urgent. There's real lives at stake, and we need to figure this out.
So everything kind of ties in together as well, like whether it's like, it's not just environment, it's like also a social side of things, it's political, it's economic, it's kind of everything else. It's so pressing just to kind of get on with it kind of thing, and just kind of take it all in.
Yeah, and for me, I think it was I don't know if you guys agree with it, but generally when you look at sort of mainstream coverage of climate change issues, I think there generally is just a lack of diversity and voices that you get. So you don't really, it's usually sort of boiled down to emissions and big abstract concepts that just go over most people's heads. You know, like when you're reporting on climate emission commitments and stuff like that, I mean, people understand it to a point, but it doesn't really resonate with them. And I just thought that, you know, it's an issue that affects everyone. And I just thought that there's so many stories out there of things that people are doing, ways that they've been impacted, that they just need to be shared. You know, people coming up with refill shops where instead of, you know, buying everything that's prepackaged, you can just go in and buy what you need. You know, there's solutions out there, and there's people thinking about the issue from different perspectives that might resonate with people differently. So, you know, it's not about pushing it onto individuals, but it's also kind of understanding that it's actually a more complex and rounded issue than what the mainstream media might make it sound like it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There are a lot of individuals who think that our personal efforts can't do much and we have to just hold all these big corporations accountable. What do you guys think of that?
I think there's a certain balance to be struck between that, because there is only so much cutting out meat and stuff will do, but like if people put enough pressure on, or like collectively, like it's all very well like doing it individually, but I think as a collective you do have a certain strength to influence corporations, but you can't do it alone basically. I don't think it can be done alone. Strength in numbers. Yeah.
What about you, Brandon? Why did you get into climate change writing?
I think, well, I don't consider myself quite the environmentalist. I was heavily influenced in my youth. I think I'm maybe a little bit older than you all. But I was a big message points growing up as a young child, like Captain Planet, all of that stuff. That really got me interested in it, got me thinking at an early age about what am I doing to make the world a better place. I know it sounds cheesy, but that's where my mind was. And so as I've gotten older, I've still had that thought, what am I doing, or what could I be doing to impact this very pressing issue, and how can I use the skills that I have to do that? And a lot of that is in reporting, video, photo, not to try and get to the heart of these issues and trying to actually show people that there's good news out there, there's hope. Coverage of climate is only going to get bigger, which is it is something that just needs to be covered more and needs to be integrated into more types of reporting, and not just like a climate beat, but all aspects of in any beat. There's room for a climate story, and so I think that's where I would like to come in, and that's what I enjoy covering.
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting post COP26, because I think COP26 has seen a lot of like mainstream news media pick up on the climate angle and really report on it quite heavily. And I really hope that stays beyond COP26, because a big part of it is going to be accountability. So it's going to be making sure that whatever's been promised actually follows through. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I hope mainstream media don't drop the climate beat because COP26 is done and dusted, and they don't, completely get rid of it, because I think there is a space for climate reporting in ongoing news media, especially because it impacts so many different areas, and it can be specific to each region, and it can be specific to groups of people, industry. So I think it is like a really interesting topic to cover as well, to be honest.
Thank you to everybody in New York and also in Belfast who took part in that conversation. Similar discussions happen with me as part of a transatlantic project I'm part of. I am a member of the editorial team at Unpublished Magazine. So Unpublished Magazine is a print and online publication that is based in Los Angeles with writers, artists and editors from all across the world. Earlier, I sat down with Carson Huffer in Ohio, Sharmila Day in Arizona, joining with Natalia Sinek in Lincoln, England, as well as myself in Belfast. we began our discussion by speaking about how climate change impacts us differently in the areas that we live in the world.
Yeah, I just started as a freshman, so I'm like kind of new to the climate activism scene here at Harvard, but at home, I'm from Tucson, Arizona, and just in terms of the like environmental, like what I see happening in terms of environmental change, it's been quite severe. So the summer that I graduated, which was 2 summers ago, we had a really, really bad wildfire in my hometown, and it was like the driest summer on record. And then this summer was the wettest summer on record, and it was completely the opposite. So it's been kind of crazy to see like really extreme climate events become so erratic and so frequent, and to change like from year to year like that. So yeah, it's been really scary, I guess, to see like how it's been coming to fruition in my own area.
So I've lived in Ohio my entire life, and we've had really interesting issues when it comes to climate change, partially because we are surrounded with the Great Lakes, and there's been a lot of issues there about various types of like fishing, wildlife, the heating of the lakes. We also have currently been having an issue over the last a little over a year now, because the Ohio legislature passed a really, really, really bad energy bill that was slated as a clean energy bill, and in reality very much was detrimental and was just keeping failing nuclear power plants going that were causing a lot of pollution. So we are having a bit of a mess here in the States, but there have been a lot of activisms going on both on my campus and in the surrounding area. I'm a member of a group called Sunrise Columbus, which is part of the larger Sunrise movement that you may or may not have heard of. And they've been doing a lot of work of just protesting and trying to actively lobby for better bills and protections both in our state and around the country.
Do you think the government's tackling climate change well enough, or do you think young people are tackling it well enough? What are your thoughts on how we are actually fighting to make the climate in the future and the climate now better?
I think the issue is like obviously the government keeps pushing for things with like green energy and things like that, but the issue is they're pushing things towards like everyday people like us, where they're like, oh, don't use like plastic straws because it's bad for the environment, when in reality it's all the big corporations that cause most of the issues when it comes to climate change, and they're still not being held accountable for what they're actually doing.
I definitely have seen the issue of like we are passing things that aren't necessarily limiting any corporations or really bringing down any of their pollution and their issues that are contributing to climate change, and we're just continuing to put out like and by we I mean the government is continuing to put out notions of like, use less plastic, here's a couple of helpful hits on how you can fight climate change yourself, but we need to band together instead of thinking of it as an individual contribution, that it has to be everyone sticks together, from like the individual person all the way up to the corporation and to the governments that are working together to halt climate change, or else nothing's going to happen. We can't make this change as individual people. It has to be across the board. Everyone is helping.
So we talk about various amounts of issues at Unpublished. Like recently, we've had all sorts of articles. I think Nat did one on Boris Johnson recently. But you know, we cover big areas, from women, from people's bodies, from the environment, and all sorts. Do you think the way that we look at climate change and climate activism, do you think it could have any impact from a young perspective writing on a bigger platform?
I definitely think it does make an impact, because even if it's like, even if that one person sees it, it's another person that's fighting towards making a better future for all of us. And it's like, everyone thinks that it's like, oh, it's one little thing, but it makes a big change. Like, I grew up in Poland. We didn't even have recycling bins until recently. Whenever I visited my grandma, everything went into the same bin, until she literally saw on TV about climate change issues in America, and she was like, oh, maybe I should start doing something about it myself. So it's like, yeah, maybe she was just that one person that decided to do something about it, but it's still getting closer to the goal of where we need to be.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just to kind of add to that, I think communication is one of the biggest parts of any like social justice movement, like being able to not only educate people in the issue, like especially for climate change, like talking about the science and like how we know that climate change is real, and how we see all of the changes happening in day-to-day life, but also convincing people to not only believe that it's happening, but to take action and join the cause. I think communication is completely central to that, and especially as young people who have like grown up with the internet, who like have a much better understanding of how to use social media platforms and all of that. I think we're in a very special place to utilize the massive communication strength of the internet, to convince people and to bring awareness. So at Unpublished, like, even though, kind of what Nat was saying, even though it might seem like small contributions to write an article here or there about a really important issue, I think it's not only giving me personal skills in how to communicate, but it's just continuing this idea of like using the internet. And since we're young people and we've like grown up with it, I feel like we're in a very special place to know how to use it well to spread a message.
Do you guys ever worry that us talking and making action on climate change could become a trend? Like, a lot of things do. I mean, if we look, like recently, I've been doing interviews about spiking all day. And a lot of people have gone, oh, do you remember when we were talking about Sarah Everard, about if it's just another movement like that? Do you feel like climate change could become another sort of trend that we try and make action on for a while and then we slowly forget about it?
I mean, the issue is like, with most things when it comes to activism, there's always going to be people that just hop on it for the trend. So it's like, when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, there were some people that didn't care about it at all, but still posted the black square on Instagram to make themselves look like they were woke. But the thing is, even if it's a trend in a way, it's still pushing the information forward. It's still making people be like, oh, there is something going on. So even if they post something just to make themselves look cool or make themselves look like they're educated, it's still pushing that information further and further along. It's still making people want to look into it. So something becoming a trend isn't necessarily always a bad thing. It could actually benefit us in the long term.
Yeah, I agree. And just to I think one of the interesting things about the climate movement is that because it's climate change and like the events, like the whole point is that events will get worse and worse as as time goes on. It's kind of this looming threat now where we're starting to see like the beginning of changes, but we haven't seen like the worst of what could happen. Whereas like that could happen in the future. So I think the idea of it being a trend, I think it's a concern maybe for now when a lot of it feels like separated and a little bit hypothetical if you don't live in an area that's like already starting to change. But I feel like it'll become less and less like that as more and more areas of the world start experiencing those changes. So I feel like it's a little bit different than maybe some of the other social justice movements in the sense of like, we don't have a lot of immediate events where we're like, okay, this was a really big thing that happened and now like we're going to talk about that for a while. It's more like these little gradual things that are building up to like bigger and bigger things. So yeah, I think it is a concern that it could just be a trend and like people will talk about it for a while and it'll go away. But I think it kind of is like in the 80s when people talked about climate change and it wasn't that pressing. And then versus now how people talk about climate change, it's built a lot of momentum already. So I feel like in the future, it'll just like continue to build.
Welcome back, everybody. My name is Darcy Taylor, and we'll be discussing how the web can be used to communicate effective ideas and news stories. With me today, I have Lauren Johnson and Isabel Schultz, who were part of the 2020 MA class and were core members of the team of putting together a website called Green Future Media, which showcased work produced at QUB relating to the environment and climate change. The website was funded by the QUB Green Fund. So, what made you decide on this website format?
So basically it was partially necessity because we were all producing remotely in the pandemic. So we still wanted to have a place to showcase the work of others. So we went with the website, and what is also good about the website is that it can be continuously edited. It can just become a gallery of more and more environmental work.
Yeah, as Isabel said, partially necessity, but also what is so great about it, I think, is that young people, obviously Gen Z, the new generation of activists and journalists, and one of the best ways to reach them and to engage them is online. And it also gives them a platform as well to share their own work. And many people who perhaps are new to the media world, or maybe just getting started in their careers, or students, this gives them a place to have their work published as well and to have it showcased to people all over the globe. So we think that it works really well in that way as well.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you find are the main challenges of making these type of stories?
Me and Isabel were chatting about this earlier, and I personally think that when you're reporting on any story about climate change and environmental issues, it's a difficult one because obviously every work that you produce should be factually accurate, should be ethical, and should be informative. And obviously we're facing a crisis, so it's very important to be realistic about that. But we also find that you don't want to almost portray work in a way that is nihilistic. You don't want people to think, well, what's the point? You know, we've heard a lot of work today about this balance between the responsibility of corporations and also the responsibilities of the individual. So I feel like one of the biggest challenges is producing work that also expresses the severity of the situation, but also shows people perhaps a sense of hope and optimism that makes them feel empowered, that they can, make a positive change.
Yeah, and then also producing something new. Like, we've heard so much about pollution and carbon emissions and plastic, and a challenge is finding new stories so that people don't think, oh, I've seen this again, I've seen this over and over, I can just switch off.
Yeah, because it's very easy to get turned off, isn't it? People kind of want to get involved, but they don't want to feel like they're being bombarded with information that they feel like could scaremonger them. How do you balance that, thinking really critically about the situation, but also making sure that it draws people in?
Yeah, it's a challenge. Darcy, you've put it very well, and I think that it's the responsibility of journalists, as Isabel was saying, to find new stories and find new angles and to present the stories that perhaps aren't getting enough coverage because it's such a wide issue and it encompasses so many different areas that you want to be able to uncover these stories that aren't actually being told. And I think that's what will engage people, that will stop people from feeling apathetic because, they're like, well, we know plastic's an issue, we've heard all of this before. And I think that finding those unique angles, those unique stories will really help in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this event is so great because it is focusing on the voice of young people, and as young people yourselves who kind of cover these type of stories, what do you feel most passionate about?
God.
Too many.
I think it's the individual stories that I would be most passionate about, and I think that possibly also goes for you, Lauren. It's like individual people finding their passion and then maybe producing something about it, or writing, or basically on our website we have any kind of media. We've print, we've photos, we've got different audio pieces. It's just whenever you see someone else having found their passion and producing something on it, that for me, then also just giving them a platform, that's my passion.
Yeah, and for me as well as a journalist, I'm a musician as well. So a lot of the work that I do kind of focuses on the music industry and what the music industry can do to become more sustainable, because there are lots of issues, obviously, regarding massive tours. If you think about artists like Billie Eilish and Justin Bieber and these huge acts that are touring on a global scale, and they are obviously traveling incredible distances. And I'm really interested in how the music industry can actually enact different changes, different schemes to try and make worldwide touring more sustainable, and even things that smaller artists can do as well regarding their merchandise and reducing waste that way. Music fans, like everyone enjoys music, but traveling to go to a concert, how can you be more environmental in that? In terms of your collection and all the merchandise and records that you own. So that's one particular area that I find doesn't get a lot of exposure. So I've been working on a number of projects recently with the BBC and things, exploring that issue. And that's something, as Isabel said, I think it's a story that maybe isn't necessarily talked about enough. So I'm personally really passionate about that.
Yeah, because that's definitely something I've personally never heard of before. I've never thought about it in that way. And, as reporters and journalists yourselves, how do you balance between telling local stories but also international? Do you think that one can relate to people more, or how do you balance that?
Yeah, and that project that I've just recently finished with the BBC, I was able to try and speak to people all over the world to try and bring this story to light. So I spoke to individuals who are Canadian artists who travel across America. I was able to speak to local bands and local artists who play shows in Belfast and travel up and down Ireland and Northern Ireland for their gigs. So I think as a journalist and as a reporter, you want to always prioritise diversity in your sources and in your contributors to make sure that you're being reflective and that you're not just focusing on your own little bubble. But Isabel, I know you've been doing work recently that might feed into that as well.
So I just got back from COP actually. I did a study visit there with a group of 14 Green scholars, and it was really eye-opening because I was actually the only European person in the whole group, and they were coming from countries like Vietnam, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, and they were telling me things that I had never thought of, and they were just casually telling me things like, oh yeah, no, my aunt died of heat stroke. No, this person that I knew had lost their house in a flood. So for me, I think it's stepping out of your own little bubble and meeting multicultural groups of people that then just gives you a wider perspective. So it's basically finding individual people in the big crowd.
Definitely. And see the website, it should be up here. Would you be able to just give us a quick whistle-stop tour, kind of what's on it and what people can expect to get from it?
Yeah, and it's a very user-friendly website. It's up behind us here. It's difficult to kind of crane our neck and show you all, but if you go on the homepage, we have just the general information about the website regarding when it was started, the individuals behind it, and kind of our mission statement and what we're all about. Isabel, you might be able to see a bit better with some of the other tabs and other pages on there.
So it's basically it tells you our story, and then we've kind of got a few different categories of our stories. So you can see we've got some audio work, we've got some print work as well, we've got some video projects. So it's basically just divided into different kinds of media so that it's very, as you said, user-friendly to just click through it, see if you like something, and then we also always try to link to whoever contributes because we accept contributions from basically whoever. We focus on young people and students, but whoever has a passion for the environment can just get on our website.
So it is very easy to apply to, so anyone can really apply if they have work that they want to commit. Is there a web email that you can send anything to?
Yes, so the website is actually entering a new phase. They're going to be passing it on to a new team very soon. So if you are a journalist or an artist, a photographer, a creative really in general who is making environmentally themed work and you would like to potentially get your work featured on the site, you can get in touch. There's an email address. It is greenfuturemediaqub@gmail.com, and if you submit your work there, the new cohort will be able to check it out.
Brilliant. So now we're going to watch one of the VTs from the website. This is Belfast 2050. It is a short film by QUB Architecture by Gabrielle Jimink, along with broadcast and architecture students who are part of the Public Collab, which is an annual collaboration between broadcast and architecture. Queens, enjoy.
Talk about man is to talk about everything and nothing at the same time. If I say you must survive or I must survive, life becomes a game and not a journey. When we wake up each morning, we have the chance to laugh, play, sing, cry, and love. In peace or war, the verticalization of shelters of tomorrow will be our undeniable reality. Have you ever wondered what your future will be like? Anna, she's already tired. This morning of January 17, 2050, she wakes up for another day, a lonely and chaotic day, like her mind that has been facing the constraints of a difficult future. She lives in one apartment which reflects a sad space and poor living conditions. A major problem is overheating affecting her health. Her breakfast is always the same as she has no choice of a taste alternative. Her apartment is one of the few places she can rest from the storms. Her fun is based on artificial projections. People of the past only concerned with the present, and for the people of 2050, it's now too late. In the lonely appreciation of this hour, before her eyes closed to the world, the images passed quickly from everything she saw and lived. In the various transformations that took place over the time of her existence, science cracked the codes, technology created machines, robotics, ultra-modern equipments. But the moral transformation of creatures is still at a slow pace. We have the power and knowledge to create our future now. Let's together discover our journey. Welcome to Belfast of Tomorrow.
So we are now coming to the end of the event today, but before we go, we just wanted to say some thank yous. So thank you to Craig, Ashlyn and Johnny for all their technical help, and also to the
And thank you, of course, to the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission for its support, and thank you to Jason and Lisa who have joined us here in the Sonic Lab today. And thank you to Professor Marguerite Holloway and Brian Palmer, who helped connect us with their students from their course covering climate visual storytelling at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism.
We also want to say thank you to Dr. Nuala of the School of Architecture here at Queen's University and the Public Collab Cohort of 2020. Thank you so much all for joining us today in the studio, and for all those watching at home, from the Sonic Lab here at SARC and Queen's University, we wish you a goodbye and stay safe.